This gun says there will be no lynching here. There's earth enough to bury every man who comes to me with a rope.
Hello. My daughter's bat mitzvah was last weekend, the Saturday before I released the previous episode, episode 93, The Caves of Androzani. The day could not have gone better. Synagogue services in the morning lasted for about 3 hours. My daughter was heavily involved with the last 2 hours of service, reading from the Torah and the related Haftorah portion, and various assorted prayers, and reading a speech about her Torah portion, which amounted to chapters 3, 4, and 5 of the book of Genesis, or Bereshit, to use the Hebrew expression. However, the service came very shortly after the horrific, coordinated Hamas terror attacks in Israel. That, of course, cast a cloud over proceedings, and the rabbi gave a very powerful sermon about current events, while apologizing to my daughter for having to discuss such heavy matters on what's supposed to be her special day, but that is part of the legacy of the religious tradition, after all, and she completely understood, and so the pride of watching her on the bima, leading the congregation for so long, was mixed with the tragedy of what's been going on in the world. The party was that night, 4 hours of joyful celebration, every second of which she earned. And yes, I was carried around on the chair, and yes, that went about as well as you might think. I was dropped as I was being lowered to the floor, but fortunately, cat-like reflexes landed on my feet. No harm done. We got home around midnight, and after unloading the car, I pushed out the Caves of Androzani episode. Nobody prepared me for how much I was going to be emotionally flattened on Sunday from the aftermath of the service and current events, the war in Israel, and the party. I was pretty much out of commission emotionally and physically for all of Sunday. Everyone tells you how to prepare for the event as a parent, but nobody prepares you for what it's like when the event is over. Marco Polo is the subject of this week's episode, and I'll be honest, it was not a subject that was very much on my mind. My mind has been elsewhere. This episode is going to be a lot more philosophical and reminiscent than others. I will be including large portions of my autobiography in here. You'll be hearing another series of baseball anecdotes. The third Major League Baseball game that I ever attended was the day after the Marco Polo novelization was released in April 1985. You know I work the New York Mets into this podcast whenever I can. There's also the fact that Marco Polo is a product of its time. It was released in 1964. Some of the racial attitudes towards the Asian characters, however well-intentioned they may have been by members of the production team in 1964, parts of this story have not aged very well, and given the mood that I was in, I have decided to address this head-on, along with my guest this week, a longtime friend of the show, Ross Aitken from Gallifrey's Most Wanted. Ross and I will talk deeply about these issues, and I will also address them in my audio essay covering the novelization at the end of the program. There was that one reviewer on Apple Podcast who accused the show of having an audience of ghastly, woke zombies. This will be one of those episodes, but this is not just a Doctor Who podcast. You are also getting the direct download from my brain. Ross and I will have several conversations during our interview, talking about Broadway shows, talking about the movies of Mel Brooks. There's a lot going on in this show. I am still in that state of mind, and Marco Polo is not the most important thing in my world right now, but we are going to talk a lot about it. The Marco Polo novelization does have a heavy place in my life, as we'll discuss when we get to the audio essay. Ross is a great friend, and it's always a blast talking to him. So I now present to you episode 94, Marco Polo.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to Doctor Who Literature, the podcast taking you through the world of the Doctor Who novelizations put out by Target Books from 1973 onward in publication order. We're a member of the Direction Point Doctor Who podcast network. My name is Jason, and I'm your host on this journey, this very long journey. This is a packed episode, as we discussed in the cold open. There is an awful lot to discuss, and not just Marco Polo itself. But first, stand by for news. The son of the author of the first four-part Doctor Who serial, An Unearthly Child, all the way through The Firemaker, has been very much in the news this week, amid stories that on the new iPlayer deal, giving free streaming of every Doctor Who episode to those who pay a BBC license fee and have iPlayer access, will not be including Unearthly Child and the three-part Caveman serial that follows. There have been a lot of discussions about this on Twitter, and Ross and I will get into it during our interview. One thing I want to address here, though, when you read a lot of the comments on Twitter, some of the reactions, and again, don't mistake individual fans for Doctor Who fandom. Individual tweets that you see do not represent my thinking, or perhaps most of our thinking, but they are out there, and I do want to talk about them. Fans who say all you need to watch is the first episode, you can then skip the three-part Caveman serial and go directly to the Daleks, or we don't need the first four-part serial at all. Just start with the Daleks, or read the novelization, Doctor Who in an Exciting Adventure with the Daleks, and read about the meeting on Barnes Common, and then watch the Daleks, and just write Unearthly Child and the three-part Caveman serial right out of the canon. I could not disagree more. We have talked about the novelization of An Unearthly Child on this show. My guest was Mark McManus, the godfather of this podcast, from Trap 1, and we discussed An Unearthly Child in episode 65. Anyone who has heard that episode, and if you're new to the program, I invite you to go back and check that out as part of our packed archives. I think the three-part Caveman serial is wonderful, no matter how the son of its author turned out. It is, like many other Doctor Who stories of the 1960s, very political. It is a full-throated argument against fascism. The tribe has a choice between a semi-enlightened leader and a bloodthirsty, I'll just say that he's a Neanderthal, which is my pet theory about Cal, and the Doctor and the TARDIS crew intervene to help select a leader. Doctor Who, going woke in its very first time out in the year 1963. It is somewhat ironic that the son of the person who wrote those episodes is taking such alt-right, neo-fascist viewpoints in his various tweets on the subject. I do not think that An Unearthly Child or the three-part Caveman serial should be written out of the canon. I think they are a vital part and parcel of what Doctor Who is. Right there in the beginning, the show's mission statement and unique visual look and score are carved in stone. I hope that a way is found to keep these episodes in circulation as part of the iPlayer deal. It is not my decision to make, but I certainly disagree with those who say that the episodes falling off iPlayer are no big loss. Coming out very soon for pre-order from ATB Publishing is Outside In Regenerates. The very first Outside In volume came out in the year 2012. It is one writer writing one essay about every single classic Doctor Who serial, from Unearthly Child all the way through Survival. My contribution to the volume was the John Pertwee Season 11 classic, The Time Warrior. The Point of Outside and Regenerates, edited by Stacy Smith, is again one different writer will tackle every classic series story. Then this time out, since I already talked about Time Warrior in 2012, I am now writing about An Abominable Snowman, which you can hear me discuss with the author John Blum back on episode 10 of this podcast from our year 2021 production season. I will have a contrary take to the prevailing conventional wisdom on Abominable Snowmen. I will add the caveat that the essay was written and submitted for publication before the recent animation, which is not addressed in the book. ATB is a very small press. It is very important for pre-orders, so I'm in the book. I have a vested interest in you buying it. So this is certainly not an impartial observer, but pre-orders are very, very important. If you're interested in Doctor Who nonfiction, if you're interested in supporting small press, if you're interested in the writings of me and 157 far more talented writers discussing all the other stories, please consider going to the ATB Publishing website and pre-ordering Outside and Regenerates. I will include a link in the show notes. In the meantime, Ross and I have a lot of digressing to do. I have a lot of reminiscing to do. In fact, there was no time even for a game this week, so Ross and I are not playing a game. We are just having a very deep and involved conversation. And following that, more portions of my autobiography and my look at Marco Polo, the TV story, and the novelization, warts and all. Let's get to it.
Traveling the Vortex.
Are you ready to embark on an epic journey through time and space? Join the thousands of Whovians around the world who've discovered Traveling the Vortex, the ultimate Doctor Who podcast for die-hard fans and curious newcomers alike.
Every week, we dive deep into the Whoniverse, discussing the episodes, theories, and hidden gems. We dissect the Doctor's adventures, share behind-the-scenes stories, and explore the legacy of this iconic show.
Traveling the Vortex brings fans together, fostering a global community of Whovians. Whether you're a fan of classic or new Who, there's something for everyone.
Join us on this incredible journey as we unravel the mysteries of time and space.
Don't miss out. Subscribe to Traveling the Vortex today on your favorite podcast platform.
Traveling the Vortex. Your ticket to adventure awaits.
Traveling the Vortex is a proud member of the Direction Point Podcast Network. You're listening to the Doctor Who Literature Podcast. Keep turning the pages.
Well, actually, this is one I liked. So, I mean, I was surprised. I also had a Audible credit, so I got the audiobook and listened to that on the bus over the last 2 weeks.
I listened to that one year driving back and forth to Li Who, because I have the audio of that. It's narrated by Xenia Merton, who was in Doctor Who the one time in 1964, and then shows up in the Sarah Jane Adventures like 45 years later.
Yeah. It's a really good audiobook. She is a very good narrator. And I actually think when I do my next watch through this, I may not do the audio because I actually found it a little more enjoyable than even listening to the BBC audio version because it's just so fucking long.
Yeah, this is not meant to be a single movie. This is not a tightly written script where characters show up in the first reel and then again in the fourth reel for surprise explanations.
No,
this is the definition of 1960s serial drama / soap opera.
Yeah. I mean, I like it. I think it's a good script and it works well. And I think if we could see what they did, we'd be impressed. Because there's enough stuff out there about the map. They did the map trick and all that other stuff. And they made it like, an old 40s movie serial. That it does have that really. It feels like an RKO.
We know that Waris Hussein is an incredibly inventive and visual director. He's a young guy in his 20s, and some of the tricks that he pulls, given a very small studio space in Unearthly Child, which I want to circle back around to, put a pin in that.
Mm-hmm.
You can imagine that he would have done some very remarkably visual and inventive things with Marco Polo during the 6 weeks that he was there as well. Now, at the very first LI Who, this is before I got to know John Peel personally, he hosted a panel about his career and his Doctor Who memories. He actually saw Marco Polo live when it aired as a child in 1964. So the first thing I asked him, what was the direction like? What sort of visual tricks was Waris Hussein staging compared to, your standard point and shoot style of Doctor Who in the 1980s? He was very kind to the question, and he said, I wasn't really tracking such things when I was, not 9, 10 years old, so I'm not able to answer that. I would love to know, though. I'm sure the answer is pretty impressive. We just are probably never in a position where we're going to find out. This story was widely sold. Everything else from season 1 survives. The fact that this story disappeared is a bizarre mystery, but it's probably never coming back at this point. It's been 60
No,
years.
I'm of that belief that there are. The problem with us never seeing it isn't because they may not exist. It's that they may not, or they weren't in somebody's hands. It's just that private collectors can't. That film's fucking ancient, and
Yeah.
if it's not treated properly, it's gone. And I think now, if you found anything from that far back, it's going to be degraded. It would be a useless anyway, unless the person, made a you know what I mean, made a copy somehow. But I think there's one. I think there are private collectors who still have some, because the Web of Fear episode missing is, I'm sorry, someone knew what they were taking. It didn't just, oops, that one went missing. No, one of you in the process decided that for some fucking reason you want to inflate its value and sell it to somebody by making it the only fucking copy.
So let's come back and talk about An Unearthly Child. I'm recording this the day before the episode is released. We are recording this conversation on October 21st. So this has been, if you're tuning into this podcast years in the future and it's now 28 or 29 where you are, greetings from the past. This is the week that the son of Doctor Who's very first credited scriptwriter.
Yeah, credited. Thank you. That's the best way to put it, because okay, keep going. I'm sorry.
To quote Paul Harvey, he would want us to mention his name, followed by a very long pregnant pause where the name is never mentioned. He has come out, and there's clearly some signs of mental illness in his
Neon signs, big bright ones, Broadway size signs of mental health issues.
I'm not going to dissect him, but there are particular strains of mental illness that cause one to focus on right-wing fascist politics, and I have at least one family member who falls into that category. But he is trying to hold Doctor Who fandom hostage for reasons that are not historically accurate, but maybe it's a sincere belief, maybe he's just trolling us. He seems to believe that his father was the sole inventor of everything that makes Doctor Who, rather than a day player that wrote scripts that had to be heavily rewritten and was never invited back on a full commission to write a televised story again. He's trying to take the whole ship down with him.
Yeah, and because of the way their rights work, which is weird for us in America. It's weird because the company always owns everything, really.
Right.
But since they didn't do residuals and stuff, they weren't and their unions, you wouldn't air stuff a second time because you didn't want to pay people, because you would have to pay them again. And they're like, well, just not ever air shit again. But that first episode is not. Coburn's writing dialogue. I mean, he's writing dialogue for scenes that other people created. Okay.
And there is, again, I don't know. I haven't been in the archives. The Blu-ray's not out, so I haven't seen the various draft scripts. What people who are in a position to know are saying online is that Coburn did not write 100% of that very first week. C.E. Weber and David Whittaker, and again, I confess to not knowing much about who C.E. Weber is.
Bunny Weber, yeah.
They evidently, and again, I'm passing on things that I've read on the platform formerly known as Twitter. This is not scholarly research by your boy Jason. Evidently, Coburn did not write 100% of that week. So to the fact that the Sun is trying to take credit for the word TARDIS and the concept of Time Lord,
which is asinine, because that has been TARDIS, the Doctor, BBC, because they created the character, they hold the copyright. Bunny Weber, David Whitaker, the guy that was he ended up directing Doctor Who, but he could have been one of the doctors, and he was in there for a hot second.
Rex
And
Tucker.
yeah, and God, the head of BBC, geez, Sidney Newman and Verity. That's writing by committee. It is so well documented. I mean, it's obscene how many times you and me have probably read an article about it. It's they're very vague. It's like, who created what? We don't know, because we were creating a show, and then Coburn had to write the caveman stuff, and he owns that. See, that'd be like Terrence owns what he owns. Terrence Dix owns what he owns. Terry Nation owns what he owns and his family owns. But that's a different monster. I don't know I really feel sorry for the guy at times, and then I read his post, and then I don't really care.
Have you, and we both have a lot going on in our lives this particular month, have you read the new book Pull to Open by Paul Hayes, put out by 10 Acre Films? It's a deep dive into the creation of Doctor Who, 1962 to 63. Now, this is a story that has been told in different places, in different times, and in different ways. There is the book Doctor Who, The Early Years, I think by Jeremy Bentham, which comes out in the early 80s. Yeah, evidently, that is based on an incomplete historical record. He doesn't know a lot of what we know now, so the historical accuracy of that book, while it's a very impressive hardcover volume, the same format as Doctor Who: A Celebration, it is evidently not where you go for the direct historical truth. No. Graham Burke has touched upon it because he did the note, the very long biographical note for Sidney Newman's posthumous autobiography, Head of Drama. So Graham went into the archives and was able to read a lot of the stuff as well, because Sidney Newman tried to assert ownership of Doctor Who in the 1980s and evidently had a pretty good case. I'm curious to read Pull to Open because I want to know how much the credited author of Unearthly Child is mentioned in it, because Mark Gatiss, of course, 10 years ago does the film An Adventure in Space and Time. That writer is not in it. Now, maybe he was compressed the way that David Whitaker was compressed out for historical purposes, but you figure that if he really was the key vital creative spark, he would have been in there.
No, because the key vital spark are Wallace Hussein, Verity Lambert, Sidney Newman, Mervyn Penfield.
Yes, Mervyn Penfield.
Yeah. Okay. Not Coburn. It is, I've come to like the Tribe of Gumparn. The caveman stuff. It ages well as a fan. It doesn't get worse. It gets better. You kind of go, okay. They're acting their butts off.
This episode opens with an editorial that is a full-throated defense of the entire 4-part serial, including the Caveman historical. Now, I have not recorded that portion of the episode yet, but it will be there by the time this comes out to fans tomorrow. So yeah, I am a big fan of the Caveman serial, but it's not worth asserting ownership of the whole of Doctor Who, as the TARDIS is only a minor plot point in that 3-part serial.
Yeah. And I hate to tell them, the only one who's going to be hurting is you, because they're going to save pennies not paying you what they've been paying your father's estate for 60 years, which is probably nothing at this point. I don't know how that works, but I'm assuming this guy's getting whatever his father's kick is that he would get like any other writer of Doctor Who. Whenever, the Brigadier comes up, they got to pay those people.
Uh-huh. There's streaming rights. There's the eventual Blu-ray release for season 1. This is not a story that is being monetized.
He's hurting himself. He's never going to win this case because he's not a credible. It doesn't seem like a credible witness. And it doesn't have a claim. In the history of television, The guy that wrote the pilot really has almost nothing to do with the creation of the character. That's come here.
Yeah.
Here's your story Bible. We've done all the hard work. Write a story with them.
Give us good dialogue.
Maybe bring the character to life. And, I mean, Unearthly Child, the first episode, and I don't mean this as an insult, looks like a show by committee. Because the show never looks like that again. Really, the pilot I think it's one of the greatest pilots ever done because it holds up as a piece of entertainment television art completely. It does not, it is timeless. It is so well made, so well crafted, and it definitely is a job by committee. This is a well-produced piece of 30 minutes of television. Heck, we'll do it a second time to tidy it up.
Uh-huh.
It is not, we would have had a movie, instead of a movie about a woman and a gay Southeast Asian creating this great British institution in the Adventures in Time and Space, it would have been about Cobra.
Uh-huh.
Because, it's just to have him and then Mr. Levine. It's like, really, you're the Laurel and Hardy shit show. You're a double act of crazy.
I have seen several posts on the platform formerly known on Twitter this week that Twitter has gone incredibly downhill since it was purchased by a white supremacist billionaire who'd want us to mention his name.
Yeah, well, fuck.
However, the common refrain that I've seen is, why am I agreeing with Ian Levine in this instance? Why is Ian Levine the one who's making actual sense and good points?
Well, I every time I read him, I just realize what he is. He's not even a tumor. He's a ugly wart on fandom, and he always has been. He is the archetype of early fanboy. He is the worst of us, and I don't know. I didn't know what was going on, and I'm not been on Who Twitter as much, or any Twitter with my schedule. So I was kind of, I just kind of lurk and see what's going on, and over the last, since the pandemic and how fandoms are, and I'm not going to say just you fandom, just fandoms are as a whole. I don't really comment on certain things because I don't want. It's a lot of the time you're creating an argument to have an argument, and that's what this looked like. And I went into it, and then I remember I'd heard of this, Cobra and Son, and heard things that he's a bit off, and he's a Brexiter. He's a fan of Lawrence Fox kind of guy.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, I used to love Lewis, the show. Can't even turn it on because he's such an idiot. They're idiots. And they're angry little white boys, and they're grown men, and it's unbecoming when you're my age, or you know what I mean, and you're still acting like the spoiled little white boy, entitled to why am I not the center of the universe? Because you're not.
It's the same question I have about Russell Brand. Are these actors who are being hired to play a part by a well-funded right-wing cabal, or do these people sincerely believe the things that they are getting well paid to say? I'm not sure, but I can't give them any of the benefit of the doubt because, like the white supremacist billionaire who owns Twitter, they're doing untold damage. The amount of disinformation being spread about the Israeli war. I did manage to qualify on the platform formerly known as Twitter, and I refuse to dignify it with the new handle, to be a community notes voter. So they got rid of their verification system, so now it's a free-for-all in information. Community notes are Linda Yaccarino. She's a poor band-aid to replace the old verification system where journalists got priority of posting. And reading the community notes, they're awful. Well, some of them are correct. Some of them are awful. It's just an effort to swing the historical truth to fit your political agenda. and some of the community notes are no better than the deranged tweets from the son of the writer of the Tribe of Gum cereal. I think it's time for me to get off Twitter. Blue Sky seems to be better. A lot of Doctor Who fans that I respect are already on there. And I should say that I'm worried about losing quote unquote reach if I take my podcast off Twitter, but come on, this is not a highly rated show. I'm not going to be losing a lot of reach. My
And
subscribers are
I
just
don't think it
subscribers.
has the reach as it used to have because people like you didn't pay to be verified. So our stuff isn't put out. I post something on everything, but the only reason I still really on Twitter is for DM. Once Blue Sky has one, fuck it. I'm going, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're working on it. I think it is a better place. It's policed. There are other places you can go. The right wingers, they can all pool up on True Social or some other tiny little bubble of people and just stew in their own feces for all I care. It's the amount of ignorance. It's mind-boggling.
I hate to say the F word on this podcast, but Facebook is actually probably the place where you have the most control over your privacy and the most control over the disinformation. One of the horrible things that Yacarino has done since she took over as nominal CEO of Twitter is she got rid of the ability to report political and public health misinformation. So now you can only report for threats and abuse, and of course they don't take those very seriously. Facebook is probably the platform now where you have the most control over your identity and your uh, privacy, as long as you don't set your broadcast of your posts to global. If you set your posts to global, anybody in the world can see them, and that's where the hackers come in. If you set your account to global, your account is going to get hacked and you're going to lose everything. So as bad as Facebook is, it's actually better than Twitter or even Instagram at this point, because on Instagram you can't control who follows you. You can't filter them out. At least on Facebook, I can tell you exactly who my audience is for any given post.
Yeah. Um, I left Facebook. I had a bad mental time. End of the pandemic. Um, and Facebook. I had to get off Facebook because that's the one where anybody and their fucking brother was commenting. And I'm not said it global, but you can a friend of a friend. I've gotten it down to where I don't see that, but I don't have patience for Trumpsters. I don't. Yeah, I don't. I'm not. I don't have a filter, and I got locked. Because I called someone a piece of stupid white trash and a cracker. I went to Facebook jail, and someone asked me, and it said, "My dear departed father, if I had ever said the N word or the F word, or used a slur with anger, I'd have woken up a couple days later asking why I had been knocked out." He would have just knocked me out and explained it later because he wasn't having it, because he had no prejudice. There was no true prejudice in my father's heart. Just one of those people. He thought it was stupid. And he said it was a sign of laziness. He goes, "How lazy are you where you have to create that kind of worldview?" But he said, "Oh, cracker? No, stupid's a choice." Because I don't think he really had any problem. And it's these, it's awful. So, Facebook was terrible. It's not bad now because I only post, my personal one is just so people family members can get me, because I'm really good about interacting with my family and posting stuff for podcasts.
So speaking of podcasts, what is the situation right now with Gallifrey's Most Wanted?
Well, a week from yesterday, I will record the first new recording in months, since March, I guess. And I'll be recording with Fraser Gregory. We're going to do Fear of the Deep. I'm taking away from my wife. She was having a hard time. She was a good sport, but I'll do New Who with her because the old Who was like, she had no point of reference.
Right.
So Fraser's going to do it, and then I have one I had recorded with Mark and one I have recorded with you all set. So I will have a head start going into the new So, and I've got the next 2 stories kind of blocked out after that because I got Melvin's going to come back and
Oh, wow, yeah.
Melvin's going to come back and we're going to do King's Demon.
Ooh.
He likes it. I hate it. So I'm like, good, because I really hate it. It's one of my lead. But you know what? I rewatched Davison about a year and a half ago, and I went, you know what? That last season is a lot better than I remember it. And he's going to also do the next 6E audio is the musical. They're Pirates of Penzance, and and Melvin's going to join me for that. And I was forced to go see Gilbert and Sullivan, and I like Gilbert and Sullivan. Like it a great deal when it's done professionally. And yeah, stuff like that. I'm going to go on. I'm going to have guests, and we'll see if I can keep up. I'd like to do when new Who's are coming out. I'm going to try to find people to come on the day after it airs and do a quick recording. Because it's going to be weird how we see it, because it's going to drop to Disney at the same time it airs on the BBC.
Right.
So that's 2 p.m. on a Tuesday? Well, I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know how they schedule. So it'll be kind of weird. You know, am I taking days off at work so I can watch it without spoilers? But yeah, no, we're getting back. I'm going to get it back on the feet, get a regular, ask you and Mark and Simon and Joe and Mark to come back on, both Marks, Mark McManus and Mark Conkrum, come back on and do stuff. And I may stick to the format, but I may pause, not do a specific story and do something else, like a comic book or an audio or an event or, season things instead of just take breaks from the serials for a while and then go back to them.
So let's circle back around. You mentioned Pirates of Penzance. That was my second ever Broadway musical.
Oh, did you? So with the Kevin Kline one? You're not that old.
Oh, I'm catching up to you. I no longer have the playbill. I no longer recall if I saw Kevin Kline and Linda Ronstadt and Angela Lansbury.
But it was that production.
Knowing my parents as I do, I probably saw the second or third cast. I don't remember how long it ran.
Ran about 3 or 4 years. It ran a while.
But we purchased the soundtrack. Walking out of the theater, my father purchased the actual vinyl LP record, and that had Kevin Kline and Angela Lansbury and Linda Ronstadt. So that
I remember watching it on HBO.
That was played over dinner many nights over a period of years. So my very first Broadway show was Annie, and then my second would have been Pirates of Penzance. And I had a Pirates of Penzance t-shirt, which I wore to summer camps. This must be 1982. So yeah, that was huge for me. That was my intro to Gilbert and Sullivan.
I saw Annie the final week at the Kennedy Center before it went to Broadway.
Oh, wow.
So I saw the original cast as it was moving, because it was still in the era where you would do out of town, and some big shows would do their final out of town for like 3 weeks at the Kennedy Center. Something they knew was going to make money, I saw I saw the original cast, and my father stood up, and I was a little kid, and he goes, "What do you think?" And I said, "I didn't really like it." He went, "Neither did I." And we walked out. I'm not a big music. I like musicals, but I'm really kind of the traditional, like Annie kind of formula really doesn't engage me. But I got to see. But I saw Zero Mostel play Teyev in his last final tour as a kid. Yeah. And I saw Pippin there too. And Pippin was played by a specific actor. And when they took off the wig at the end, when they're about to kill him, me and my brother went, "What the hell?" We looked in the playbill. Yeah, it was Greg Brady. We didn't realize it until they took the curly wig off. Oh, that's who Barry Williams is.
Barry Williams, a.k.a. Greg Brady from the Brady Bunch. Yeah, I've seen Fiddler on the Roof twice. I saw the last Broadway revival with Danny Burstein.
I would have loved to have seen that. That looked amazing.
They were trying to go for a wider historical perspective. It opens with Tevye's grandson back in Anatevka doing a shtetl tour 100 years later. but that thread is not really built upon the rest of the musical, so it's kind of an odd introduction, and then they don't come back to it at the end, which I wish they had. That would have required writing some new text. But I saw that the second to last day. The theater was packed. That was not a show that was ready to close. I think it closed prematurely. But then a year and a half later, I saw off Broadway the Yiddish language remount of Fiddler, because that was written in the 60s.
Oh, the one Joel Grey directed?
That's right. So they brought it back, and it starts airing at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in Battery Park, lowest tip of Manhattan. Not even, it's like a 2,000 seat theater. So they had the Yiddish super titles. They had the English language super titles over the stage, but the performers are all in Yiddish, even the ones who had to learn it phonetically. And from my childhood, I was able to remember a lot more words than I thought I would. So as I am listening to the Yiddish and reading the English language super titles over the stage to see what has changed from the original book, which I know by heart, I recognized a lot of Yiddish without needing the translation, but they changed a lot of the meaning of the words to make it a lot more Jewish-centric for the Yiddish language version. So it was incredible. I saw it with my mom before she retired to the South, and we both really got a lot out of it. And then it moved to off-Broadway, and it played off-Broadway, closed right before the pandemic, and then reopened in 2022, and I wish I'd taken my kid to see it. I think it's too late now. But it ran for probably a good 4 years, which is a terrific run for a non-English production off-Broadway.
Yeah, when I was a kid, it was the longest running Broadway play, and it was until Chorus Line. Because it ran forever. I mean, literally forever. But it's a great piece. We have a theater company now called Virginia Rep. It's really like 4 theaters that are all kind of tied together. And they brought an artistic director in a few years ago. He said, I'm going to start bringing down New York actors, and we're going to pay them. Because we're going to do it as like a regional theater more than local actors. And Richmond's got a lot of actors. They're like 10 theater companies. There's work. It's not great work. You all have day jobs, but it's, fun, whatever. But they did a production of it, which was like half Richmond actors and the guy they brought down from New York to play Tell You. And it was beautiful. And my sister has seen it other times. And seeing it done, I think the version we tend to see now is not the Zero Mostel version. More the Topol. And because, the European direction was different. It was a little more realistic. Except in the dream sequences. The dream sequence is the only time they kind of blow it up. But Zero Mostel was very big and a little more comedic. It was he hit all the pathos. He hits the emotional beats. He hit them as a kid. I mean, it was mind altering to see someone act that well on stage because I was like, wow, But it's such a good show. It's moving. I love it. It is absolutely one of my favorite musicals. It is one that I think it's timeless. I think it's beautiful. I mean, and it treats the musical aspect of it. The thing that bugs me about musicals is people break into song randomly and start dancing. But where in Fiddler, it is an aside, as in Shakespeare, where he's literally talking to you, the audience. So he's going to sing you information. Or when it's sunrise, sunset. Those are their thoughts. You know what I mean? They're not singing to one another. They're not singing to their family. Their thoughts are going through their heads in a musical manner. The mother and father, Tevyev and Gilda remembering what's happened to my children, what's going on. Does he love me? Does she? You know what I mean? It's beautiful. It's a beautiful piece.
I've read that Zero Mostel was notorious for going off script and making himself the comedic center of attention, even if the occasion didn't call for it. Kind of like Tom Baker, seasons 15 through 17, where you have these writers submitting what they think are serious stories, and then Tom Baker is spending 40% of his time fondling the TARDIS console and mugging at the camera.
Yeah. Well, Mostel was, he was very arrogant, wasn't a nice person. He really has a terrible reputation. He's terrifying. He was a bit of a drunk. He was a bully. It's, he wouldn't have a career today. But he was also a genius. I think he's great in the front. He is such an abhorrent piece of human being in the movie. Have you ever seen The Front?
We had to watch it as a companion piece to reading Arthur Miller's The Crucible when I was in 11th grade.
Oh, really? That's a good guy. It's a great movie. It's my favorite. And in some ways, it's one of my favorite movies with Woody Allen in it because he's not in charge. You know what I mean? He's just a hired gun, and he's great in it. And it's a great movie. And it just shows you it's kind of funny and like, ha Blacklist. And then it's the end, you're like, and it's still a comedy at heart, but it's heavy. I love it. It's a great film. And Zero Mostel is great in it. He's an abhorrent human being. And he's basically playing himself. But he's playing, I think it's kind of Soupy Sales is who they're hinting that he's supposed to be. But Soupy didn't get in trouble. Kind of the kid show they're basing it off is Soupy Sales.
When Norman Jewison is hired to do Fiddler the movie, 1970-71, he makes the conscious decision to not bring in Zero Mostel for that reason.
And it's a great thing because we got Topol.
And Topol, of course, is later, he's not the villain, but he is the main guest star in For Your Eyes Only, kind of to the detriment of Julian Glover, who's supposed to be the Bond villain in that movie. The Topol passed away very recently, had an amazing career. But let's finally bring this on topic to Marco Polo. What is the connection between Fiddler the movie and Marco Polo, the forgotten and lost Doctor Who serial?
Oh, I have no idea. Is there a correct specific answer to that?
Who is the title character in Fiddler on the Roof?
Tayev. Oh, no, the Fiddler.
The Fiddler was played by Tootie Lemkow, and I may be pronouncing the last name incorrectly because I don't think I've ever heard it pronounced. He was a Doctor Who semi-regular in the 60s. He was in 3 missing serials, and every story that he was in front of on camera is now gone. Marco Polo, Mythmakers, the last episode of Crusade. He then was brought back as choreographer for part 3 of Celestial Toymaker because he was also a dancer. However, that part of Celestial Toymaker is also missing, so everything that Tootie Lemkow did for Doctor Who is gone. The best way you have of seeing him is in the mute role of the Fiddler in the movie version of Fiddler on the Roof, and he's in a substantial portion.
He's very good in it. It's a nice mime performance. You know what I mean? A silent performance because he is setting tone. He kind of segues scenes. Like okay, this is this emotion. It's really. I mean, Jewison did a great job translating a very theatrical piece. It is in theater. I mean, you do it on stage. You're doing it with big Broadway sets and stuff like that. And it's gorgeous. The theater down here it was a great set. It was so good. And how they move things around without moving anything. I mean, without moving any big set pieces. Most of the set was static. It was furnitures and carts, and they had a turnstile for so when people had to walk a distance, they would just walk in place. And it's amazing. And Jewison actually captures it because he does a terrible job with Jesus Christ Superstar. Which is a train wreck.
So, Marco Polo. What are you more familiar with, the surviving audio or the novelization?
I remember reading the book and thought, because I haven't read some of these in so long. It's like, okay, I remember the John Lucarati ones are good. They're well written. Is it a good story? I couldn't remember. I, for the most part, had not read it, and I read it, and I went, this is actually really good. But I normally am the BBC CDs audios, and I don't think that has narration because it's an early one. No, it does have narration. It does have narration. It has narration that actually was in the original thing.
Right, because Mark Eden is narrating Marco Polo's captain's log journey.
Yeah. So they didn't really, before they started bringing in the narrations, which helps. I think the narration helps. But I also bought an Audible credit, and I said I would like to read this. It's a complete audio. It's it's an actress. And actually, I think when I do read, I was saying this early on. I loved it. It's a really good audiobook. It's read. You know, I think it's a really good version of this story. It's because it is long. I mean, it's a 7-parter, and it's each story's its own little adventure and a half, something like that. You may have an episode where they travel and you set up the cliffhanger for the next episode. But I think I think the book is tighter and more concise and a good read.
Yeah. What are your favorite aspects of the book? Like, what struck you listening to the audio?
Just that it was a lot tighter. It moved at she's not, it moved at a pace that, it really only focuses on the major characters. Some of the side characters are, there, the bad guys and the people that do things, but it's really heavily focused on the big 7,
Yeah.
Pink Cho, Tagana, Marco, and then the TARDIS team. It really is this little bubble of people traveling together. And I got a better feel of that they were on a journey together because it was a little more intimate. Does that make sense?
It is a story structure that you will never see again. And what's interesting about it is, on television at least, the book is vastly different. We'll talk about that.
Oh, yeah.
At the end of episode 1, you learn that Tigana is the bad guy, the snake in the grass, the spy in the camp. He's on an assassination mission. He is not a friend of Marco Polo. He's traveling with the caravan, but he is out to destroy the caravan and then destroy Kubla Khan. On TV, the TARDIS crew doesn't find out that he's the bad guy until the episode 6 cliffhanger, when he gets into a mini sword fight with Ian Chesterton. So the TV is a psychological drama where Tigana, who hates Marco Polo and wants him dead, is pretending to be Marco's friend and trying to turn Marco against the TARDIS crew. There's an awful lot of psychological play. You would never see the story told in this way before. Number one, because Doctor Who is now down to 45 minutes, so it's only a 2-parter instead of a 7-parter. You would never let the TARDIS crew take 6 weeks to figure out that the person that we know as the bad guy is the bad guy. You wouldn't have a surprise.
Yeah, now that you mentioned that, I forgot. It's been a while since I've listened to the audio. And I've listened to it a bunch because, it is that first season, and it's the one, it's not, I have a personal favorite historical that I want to come back.
Which is?
Massacre. I gotta see it. I gotta see it. I think it's a really good story. As a history nerd, and I don't know a lot about that part of Protestant history. You know what I mean? So it's exciting. It's good. Feels a little bit like I'm watching a cheap Dumas novel adapted into TV, and stuff like that. I like it. I think it's great, and it's got Peter Purves in it. I really love Stephen. I think he's one of the most underrated companions.
The Massacre is a very misunderstood story because all anybody knows about it is that William Hartnell is playing a dual role as the bad guy, but that is not even remotely correct. Hartnell's only in 2 proper scenes as the abbot. He has less than 100 words total in the entire piece. It really is Stephen's story, but Stephen is not the square-jawed action hero like Rory becomes in A Good Man Goes to War.
He's a witness.
He's the inept hero who refuses a sword fight, can't remember addresses, barely escapes alive. And when the Doctor does show up, when they finally let William Hartnell back on camera, Hartnell doesn't do anything to try to avert the massacre. He just escapes, taking Stephen with him, and that causes trouble. Whereas in the book, the Doctor is intentionally playing a dual role as the abbot, and he's doing it to try and preserve history and make things better. So at the end of the book, the abbot gives an ecumenical speech and it tones down the massacre and everybody leaves happy. That is not what happened on TV by a long shot. And again, that is a Doctor Who story you can never tell again because the Doctor is not in it. The companion hero is not a hero. the bad guys win.
It would be a Dr. Light episode, and it would be 40 minutes, and it'd be like Blink. You know what I mean? If that's what they would do. That's one another reason I like it, because Steven's a witness to history. It's not his story. It's not. It's never his story. I got to find the doctor, and in doing so, witnesses history. And then the doctor, like you said, comes up at the end and goes, "We need to get out of here because what's about to happen is horrific." And it's consistent with the Aztecs. We got to go. This is happening. We got, and it's a different tale. How Stephen is like, why didn't we do anything to at least save the one young girl? I think it's a great story.
The only analog to New Who is Midnight. That's a story where the doctor's by himself. He is completely on the back foot, and the bad guy almost wins. But because it's 21st century television, we do get the noble self-sacrifice of the tertiary character that lets the doctor off the hook. But he learns his lesson, and he's a sadder and wiser man the morrow morn, until the following week when David Tennant is back to his usual face-pulling shtick. Midnight is one of his best performances. That's a very downbeat story where the doctor does not win, kind of like The Massacre. Now, the Massacre novelization is coming up. James Corey Smith, friend of this show, has done the incredible Black Archive on it. So when that comes up on this show in quite some time, that's not until book 121, I will have a lot more to say about The Massacre. We'll be hearing from James Corey Smith on this show again. But as an American, I don't have a frame of reference for Protestants as a noble, oppressed minority, because they are the culturally dominant force in the state. So the facts behind the massacre, what happened in France in 1572, we can't really reconstruct that in our heads, because that is the opposite of how things work here in the States.
Yeah, I think that's why it's not taught. I mean, and, my mother, we were raised Catholic, and then she got kind of tired of it, and we went Catholic like became Episcopalians. So, and I don't, I know our history is put upon Protestants come here for their religious freedom, but as George Carlin said, we're a country founded by people so uptight the English kicked them out. Okay? And that is the best description of the Protestant mentality, that it has infected every American, because there are bits and pieces of the American psyche is that I'm going to do what I want to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's insane. So yeah, you're right. I never saw it from that. And it was never that, because I'm an American and I was raised, the way I was, it was like every religion is the same as the others and it's all to be respected. And you just, we all have our own, you know what I mean?
And that's why Fiddler lands so much for me, because that is literally my grandparents' story.
Yeah, I can imagine.
All 8 of my 8 great-grandparents are immigrants. 3 of my 4 grandparents are immigrants who came here under terrible circumstances. There was this huge pogrom in Odessa in 1905, and it was so bad that even the New York Times wrote about it at the time, rather than pretending that it never happened. That's why when the Ukrainian branch of my family came here, and they had a hard time setting up, but they eventually made it. So Tevye could have been any one of my great-grandfathers. Tevye could have been both of my grandfathers. And it's that struggle. You're balancing the need to adhere to your religious traditions with the reality on the ground, and it doesn't match up. And Tevye spends most of the story fighting this desperate rearguard action against assimilation and the need to move the quote-unquote Jewish problem out of your country and make it somebody else's problem, but kill as many as you can on their way out the door. The story Fiddler on the Roof is a tragedy for Tevye, and again, that is literally my family history, so that's why it lands for me. Marco Polo, the actor who plays Kubla Khan, Martin Miller, I believe, was a Jewish refugee from Eastern Europe.
Okay.
Tudi Lemkow is playing an Asian character. He was another Jewish immigrant. A lot of them, they fled to England and they became actors, and they avoided a lot of unpleasantness going on elsewhere in Europe. Frederick Yeager, who shows up in The Savages, his first story is a Hartnell story. He, I believe, came to the UK under similar circumstances. a lot of Jewish actors show up in Doctor Who with, dreadful things happening in their biographies before they made it to relative safety. So Marco Polo, I'm not quite positive that it's not a racist story that means to say, these are ridiculous people and look at us, we're culturally superior Westerners, and this is our show and we're going to do it better than you. That's why the story is told through the eyes of Marco Polo rather than through any of the Asian characters. There's a particular, in part 3, there's a particular caricature, British actor, bad Chinese accent, ridiculous. It's just so culturally insensitive that it kind of explodes the whole story for me. That is toned down a little bit for the book, which I think wants to be more of a travelogue.
Yeah, yeah.
Marco Polo has an actual Asian director, Waris Hussein, but none of the Asian characters are played by Asian actors. So the character of Chen Chu in episode 3 and the character of Wang Lo in episodes 5 and 6 are Caucasian actors in varying levels of offensive makeup. So if this story were to be discovered and returned, I don't think it would be greeted all that well. I think it would cause the same concern that fans have about Tomb of the Cybermen when that was returned, or the concern that fans have now about Talons of Wang Chiang, or to a lesser extent, Abominable Snowmen. So Marco Polo is believed to be an all-conquering classic. I think if it were to come back, we would go, oh, we waited 60 years for this?
Yeah, how cringe would yeah, it's I'm pretty good about taking art for when it's made. I think their intent is to show a European centric view of Marco Polo. And Vic had to correct me that I was never sure if Marco Polo was real. Because it is such the story of Marco Polo is such a PR campaign. The real story. So yes, him and his father and uncle traveled. They worked in China. They knew Kublai Khan. They did business. They, it got hard to get out of there because that would happen in Japan when Europeans would land in Japan. They were either killed or it took them forever to get out of there because they weren't treated because of the cultural mores that that anybody that wasn't them was inferior. Was inferior. The same things that Europeans do when they meet another culture. You know what I mean? That you got in there and it took forever to get out. I think it would. I think you're right. I think it's probably if it had existed all this time and you and me had seen it as a kid, it would be like Talons of Wen Chiang, because I forgive a lot in Talons of Wen Chiang because I think Wen Chiang is a tragic figure, and I've always seen him as a tragic figure. He's a tool being used by Magnus Greel, the real villain, and he is destroyed by it.
And you look at the way the Doctor treats Li San Chang with respect during his Part 5 death scene versus the way that he treats Magnus Greel in episodes 5 and 6. The Doctor clearly has a lot more respect for Li San Chang than he does for the foe from the future.
Yeah.
That is a point, I think, in Talons' favor. Marco Polo doesn't really... I think Kublai Khan is a great character. Martin Miller gives a great performance. It's a small performance.
But it's just easy. I don't think it's his is racist. He makes a very bubbly character. Kublai Khan is a leader full of joy, and it's a great part. I mean, it's a wonderful performance. But it's the side characters that try to go for the bad comedy moments.
I think Kublai Khan is a very smart character. He sees through Tigana in seconds, whereas Marco Polo traveled with him in a caravan for 6 weeks of Doctor Who airtime and never twigged that anything was wrong. I think Kublai is a great character as written, and the actor does a fine job with him. But again, you have to get to the end of the story to realize that, and it's a bit of a joke. The episode is called Mighty Kublai Khan, and we spend all these weeks waiting to meet him, and then he's an old man with gout who complains a lot, and then at the very end, when Marco gives the TARDIS away, he goes, "Oh, I would have lost it at backgammon. Doesn't matter."
Yeah, I kind of like that moment.
Yeah,
really.
I do. There's a lot about the production that I like. There's a lot about the book that I like. But I think people who remember the book, and they forget that the book has a very different ending than the TV. The last 3 episodes are entirely different. And people forget that this is a travelogue to Asia done on a BBC budget with BBC actors, with BBC morality in 1964. This story is not going to land in 2023 the way you think it's going to land. This is not a story that necessarily has a good heart about its Asian characters.
No, I think the only character, I mean, Ping Cho is the only one, you know, and they just play her as another teenage girl. So you got the two teen, you know what I mean? She's played like any generic teenage girl.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think you're probably right. I mean, it's one that people always want to, we always talk about, but is, I think the only, because I think like Aztecs holds up because it treats, I mean, it's white people playing native, native Mexican American people, and they're not. There's not. They're never treated. They're treated as pretty much real people with real character. And name characters with agency. Each one, they all have a part to play in the story. The bad guy's the bad guy, and he's wonderfully over the top, but it's not racist over the top. It's wahaha over the top.
Now, Xenia Merton, who narrates the audiobook, she was mixed race. Her mother was from Burma. She's only 18 years old when she makes it. So that at least is very good casting. And she, of course, has a very long career, does the audiobook, does the Sarah Jane Adventures. But I don't know if you'd be able to cast this story properly, given what's going on in the BBC in 1964. You do have some Asian characters as non-speaking extras. I think you have Basil Tang is in the cast. He's very good. But for the most part, it's white people playing Asian characters, and some of them are trying to do a good dramatic job, and some of them are trying to do bad comedy. So it doesn't land for me.
Yeah, I mean, because I think Takana's a good character. I mean, I don't think he's just he's the bad guy, but it is the secondary characters, like the guy that's gonna the servant that's gonna park the when they're at the way station and stuff like that. Those ones are you're right. They were sketchy then. It's kind of like, oh my God, what's the old, oh my God, in Ponderosa, I don't know if you want, Bonanza, where they had Hop Sung, the cook.
And it was the same in Have Gun Will Travel. Paladin's manservant is a Chinese immigrant to San Francisco, because Paladin's home base is San Francisco.
Ah, I forgot. I've only seen a little bit of those.
Have gun will travel, reap the card of a man. A knight without armor in a savage land. His fast gun for hire heeds the calling wind. A soldier of fortune is the man called Paladin.
I've actually listened. I didn't watch the entirety of the TV series, but it was the last old-time radio drama where the TV series came first, and the episodes were then turned into radio plays.
Okay.
So John Daner, who was a star in several Twilight Zones, plays Paladin on the radio. It takes place in San Francisco towards the end of the 19th century. Every week, Paladin gets a new commission, and he travels throughout the West and the Northwest, and he sees what he sees, and he does what he does. But every episode of the radio play starts and ends in his hotel suite in San Francisco, and Hey Boy is his manservant, and the character is literally called Hey Boy, and he's a Chinese immigrant. I mean, the character on the radio is actually played as a three-dimensional character, and he has a good relationship with Paladin, but it's just explaining it makes me sound like a horrible person. But there was literally a character who was written to have the name Hey Boy.
Oh my God, I'm a big comic fan, and there are things in the comic Blackhawks. Quality Comics did like Blackhawk, the Spirit. It had really the best art and some of the best things. But the Blackhawks have, I think he's called Chop Chop. Really? And Will Eisner created and wrote The Spirit. It is one of the greatest comics ever written. He is probably top like if you're going to have the Mount Rushmore of comic book artists, he is up there first. You know what I mean? And everybody's looking up to him. But he has a black sidekick. And this comic strip came out like 1940 through 46, 47. And the character is not stupid, but the character is drawn, and I'm not even going to use there's a specific word for that type of depiction, and I won't say that word out loud. But it was a name of a hospital. It was a name of a restaurant chain.
Will Eisner could literally have been my uncle, all right? His father's Ukrainian, his mother's from Romania. His family tree, I'm sure, has at least some distant overlap with mine if you go back far enough.
Mm-hmm.
Comes to New York, victim of anti-Semitism, does a lot of Jewish-themed art, not just the sci-fi stuff.
Oh yeah, it's God. I forget what the one is. I used to own a copy of it. It's beautiful.
It is an unfortunate fact of Jewish humor from a particular strand in New York, the Catskills, the Borscht Belt. You would make fun of other ethnic groups to take the heat off of your own. So a lot of Jewish humor ends up being racist, even though we certainly absolutely should know better.
Yeah, I grew up with that. My dad, because where he grew up in Flatbush, he loved comics. Definitely, when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, a lot of stand-up comics were from New York and were Jewish.
My mom grew up not too far from where your dad did, and my mother still says that on her block, while most of the families who owned the houses or lived in the building were of Jewish descent, there was one Scottish family on the far side of the block, and she could always hear the bagpipes being played.
Yeah, I don't think that was my grandpa.
I gotta find out what block your dad was on, but there's a very good chance that he and my mom were literally next door neighbors.
Yeah. I don't know if my grandfather. My grandfather was a happy little drunk guy when I was a kid, so I don't know. I didn't know him because he's born in 1898.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or 1890. I don't know, but it'll be our next year will be the 100th year that my family's been in this country.
Wow.
On my dad's side, yeah, that's it. Mom's side, second boat. So, but yeah, oh no, Jackie Mason, Buddy, I love Buddy Hackett Uncensored, filthy mouth. I will always like the one where he talks about his wife took him skiing. He does this thing about this German ski instructor, and he goes, "Jew will ski." He goes, "Jew will not ski."
I was exposed to a lot of Jackie Mason growing up, probably more than was healthy for me.
I love Jackie Mason. He just, they get it. I have a soft spot. That's why my father, he took me to see Blazing Saddles at an inappropriate young age. When he passed, me and my wife goes, "What do you want to do?" I want to watch some of the movies my father took me to. Just me and him. It was the one thing we did together. So we watched Blazing Saddles and Popeye. And my wife, she was concerned that Blazing Saddles was going to be, it's going to be so racist. She said, it's a black guy and a Jewish guy made a movie where everybody Caucasian, his name is Johnson.
Uh-huh.
And they're stupid. The white people are stupid. The only people that are intelligent are the black sheriff and the stone gunfighter. The rest of the people are morons.
My father worships at the altar of Woody Allen, my mother at the altar of Mel Brooks. So the very first Mel Brooks movie that I saw in the theater, 1983, the remake of To Be or Not to Be with him and Anne Bancroft, husband and wife at the stars.
That's a really good. I like it better than I like the original.
I loved it. I'm 9-10 years old. I had no cultural frame of reference for a lot of the jokes, but my mother was, laughing uproariously, so I really enjoyed it.
Oh God! Oh my God! Both versions are good because the other version is
Jack Benny.
Oh my God, Jack Benny. He's
Early
really
40s.
good in it. He's really, really, really good at it.
But for Mel Brooks, it's a much more personal story.
Oh, Mel Brooks is and Mel is just a genius. Mel Brooks is a genius. I watched his on YouTube. It just popped up his Kennedy Center ceremony. And it starts with Frank Langella singing Hope for the Best, Expect the Worst, with the theme song to 12 Chairs. And Frank Langella cannot sing, but it was fun. It was great. One problem is Martin Short sang he wore a blazing saddle.
Huh.
He rode a blazing saddle, saying you couldn't get one black comic on top of that damn horse. Oh God, forget the guy's name. Richard Kahn did Torquemada.
Oh, wow.
It's Inquisition. He was, the whole thing. It was great. It was great.
How long ago was this?
Oh my God. It's been a decade.
Wow.
It's been a decade. It's got to be because he's 90. Is he 100 yet?
Deep into his 90s.
He's almost 100 because him and Lear and Dyke are all, they're the last kind of four of that kind of generation. They're all about to turn 100.
97. Born June 28th, 1926. So Mel Brooks is 97. Still going strong. He was on Fresh Air during the pandemic with Terry Gross. It's an amazing interview.
Oh, there was a great interview, basically him being interviewed, documented, and that's interspersed within a history of his life. And to see the things that he did, and to kind of go, good God, man, you did everything. You know, it was a big deal when I was a kid. Oh, the new Mel Brooks movies go out. I went and saw Silent Movie in the theaters. Spaceball. When a new Mel Brooks movie, I think the only one I don't like is Love at First Bite.
My grandmother took my kid sister and me to see Spaceballs in the theater. My grandmother was 74 years old. She probably got some of the Star Wars through cultural osmosis, but she was taking me to see it because she knew that I was a big Star Wars buff. She was going to see it because it was Mel Brooks. She was a little bit older than him. They grew up in similar neighborhoods. They probably knew people in common. So for a 74-year-old grandma to take me to see Spaceballs, that is the coolest grandmother in the world. And you also mentioned Frank Langella, who was recently fired from a high-profile project for horrible Me Too behavior. So a lot of those older actors are now finally facing a reckoning, which fortunately Mel Brooks does not appear to have done anything that deserves him being erased, fortunately.
Oh, no. He was much smarter than a lot of them. And also a lot of them are just getting old and they just don't know to shut up.
So we have been talking for just about an hour. We have not really done Marco Polo justice. I have tried to talk about how the story just would not be well received, at least from a diversity and equity standpoint, were it to be recovered. I think the direction would have been excellent. I think some of the acting performances are great. Lucarati changes the ending entirely, and I'll talk about that, I guess, after the jump when I do the audio essay. But I don't think Marco Polo is the story that people think it is. And were it to survive, if we were to get all 7 episodes back, apart from maybe his technical prowess, I don't think this is a story that would land in anybody's top 20.
Yeah, I think it would take on a new thing. I think in some ways we're better that we only have the book and the audio. Because the audio, you can at least imagine it a little more correctly.
Yeah.
Because you get to, you know what I mean? You get to fix things. It's like Abominable Snowman. I'm glad it's mostly animated. Because they made the characters look Asian. And it's just a white person doing the voice. It's not the guy with the toupee tape on the side of his eye. You know what I mean? It fixes it because it takes that kind of, you're using the wrong person to play these parts. I mean, it doesn't get it completely away.
The next Outside In has just been released for pre-order. And you know how Stacy Smith works. Every Doctor Who story is covered in one essay by a different writer. So 158 stories, 158 writers. I covered Time Warrior in the original Outside In, but this version is Outside In Regenerate, so you can't write about the story that you wrote about 10 years ago. So this time I wrote about Abominable Snowman, and it is a critical deconstruction of the story. And I wrote it before the animation came out, but I am delighted that the animation takes the trouble to get rid of all the yellow face acting. So
yeah, they did. They really redesigned. They don't look like the actors at all, and I like that because in everything else they do to some extent. You know, it's sometimes more cartoony. The Scooby-Doo kind of animation Big Finish did, which I like because I don't really I just want to see Doctor Who. So yeah, it's not the way it was originally intended. That was 6 years ago. But I did like in The Abominable Snowman that they just did complete character designs for anybody who was Asian, any of the Asian characters, and made them accurate. I mean, they don't sound accurate, but
If they were to do an animation for Marco Polo, and I just don't know if that's ever in the cards, but if they were to facially recast the actors, hire actual Asian actors and use them as the facial model, and then redo two of the voices. There are two particular minor characters who are just doing the worst sort of caricature acting. If those two actors were to be revoiced and the faces were to be recast, I think Marco Polo might work a lot better as an animation, but this is all idle speculation on my part.
yeah, who knows? I mean, I know we're getting in more animation. I want to see what's going to happen with, Davies, Trainer, and Gardner. They're not going to do this small.
Yeah.
It's not how they do things. Their attitude is make it as big as it was when we were doing it. With the full force of all our talents. So maybe we do get more back. I'm still waiting to see how we get everything in November, other than the new stuff, because they haven't made an announcement.
Ross, we have not maybe done Marco Polo justice, but we have done every other topic justice.
Oh, I'm glad I enjoyed this one. Reading it again, it is a better book than it is the story.
Yeah.
It's a better book because, there's not all Target books are created equal.
True.
And I enjoyed it. It's a first Doctor story. It was, and listening to her read it, it was nice. I listen to audiobooks while I walk or I'm riding the bus to work, and it was, it moves much better as the audio. So I got a fresh take on it because I'd never listened to that.
And the restructuring of the ending works in terms of making the Doctor a more active character for reasons that I'll talk about.
Yeah. When I got to that part, I was kind of like, wow, he's doing a whole lot more heavy lifting than he did, because I'm waiting for the backgammon game. He really doesn't do a lot.
And that I will explain after the break. Ross, hopefully you and I can do some more Gallifrey's Most Wanted. Always enjoy talking to you.
Oh, no, I have some idea. Yeah, I have one. When we're done recording, I'll make the offer. I got one that I will finally finish reading the first New Adventure.
Ooh, excellent.
Yeah, that book's we're going to have that conversation about that book for when I have to do, because that's next for Sylvester.
Well, Ross, have a great rest of the day. We're going to talk after the recording stops, but for the rest of my audience, say goodbye to Ross. Been a pleasure having you, buddy.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Doctor Who, Marco Polo by John Lucarotti. Televised as Marco Polo. Teleplay by John Lucarotti. Televised in February 1964 through April 1964. Paperback release date April 11th, 1985. Target book number 94. Cover artist David McAllister. The young Venetian Marco Polo is on his way to the Emperor's court in Beijing when he meets the intrepid time travelers, for the TARDIS has landed on Earth in the year 1289. Marco Polo recognizes in the TARDIS a means of winning favor with the Emperor, but in the end the Doctor has no one but himself to blame for the loss of his wondrous traveling machine, which he gambles away to Kubla Khan. At the dawn of television, the first producers envisioned the medium as a vehicle with which to place highbrow, Broadway-quality dramas in every living room, a way to enlighten the masses without anyone having to buy theater tickets. Unfortunately, as history has proven, TV had its own ideas as to what it wanted to be, and thus very few programs today resemble the weighty fourth wall dramas that dominated, say, American airwaves in the 1950s. Marco Polo, one of many unique Doctor Who single serial genres, experiments the show tried once, knocked out of the park for the most part, and never attempted again, is such a fourth wall drama. The show's second historical, this one is based on actual people, places, and events, largely, as opposed to the generic cavemen of the tribe of Gum. But unlike later historical comedies, or dark historical tragedies, or pseudo-historical romps, Marco Polo is a remarkably straightforward tale. At the episode 1 cliffhanger, we learn that Tigana is a bad guy. That's it. That's the twist. The TARDIS crew spends most of the next 6 episodes trying to reveal Tigana's treachery to Marco Polo, without success, but there are no other surprises or revelations. The pleasure, then, if Marco Polo is indeed a story that gives you pleasure, lies not in the plotting but in the journey. Each episode takes place in a single locale, with evocative, poetic episode titles. The Roof of the World, The Singing Sands, The Wall of Lies. The story is driven forward by the succession of locations and sets, and by lengthy dialogue passages as characters argue and debate one another. The thrill is in individual moments. Marco and Ian playing chess in episode 2, Tigana effortlessly turning Marco against the TARDIS crew in episode 4, Ian lying to Marco in episode 6, causing the latter to disbelieve that the TARDIS is a time machine. The casting, with a very large caveat, is excellent. Mark Eden as Polo and Darren Nesbitt as Tigana are pretty wonderful, at least on audio, effortlessly inhabiting their characters, and you never once doubt for a second that these are 13th century adventurers who believe every line of dialogue they utter, which reveals their blinkered, just post-medieval worldviews, and it's a shame that neither actor returned to the classic series, although they would come back for various spin-offs. Martin Miller, as Kubla Khan, makes the most of the misdirections of his character, and is a delight in a limited role. The episode 6 title, Mighty Kubla Khan, appears to be ironic, as the Khan is gout-ridden, mercurial, and, well, old. But in episode 7, the grand finale, Khan sees through Tigana in just one scene, where Polo had spent 6 episodes blindly defending Tigana against all the TARDIS crew's various accusations of treachery. Tigana, what have I that a Khan should fear? Khan, the power of persuasion. But there's that caveat. We've got to talk about the yellow face. Asian characters played by poorly made up white actors, most of whom are reaching for the "ha-ha, look how silly they are all" laugh. Bear in mind that 6 of the 7 episodes were directed by Waris Hussein, with the exception of Ping Cho, as Ross and I discussed earlier, or a one-scene speaking role by Basil Tang in episode 6. This serial, helmed by a South Asian director, has no Asian characters, speaking characters, played by Asian actors. There are the 2 comedy roles played by Caucasian actors in varying levels of offensive makeup. I mentioned them earlier to Ross, no need to mention them again. I will point out that 3 of the parts, Wang Lo, Kuiji, and the Khan, were played by immigrant actors, Jewish quote-unquote ethnic types, with names like Gabor Baraker and Tudi Lemkow, both semi-regulars in the early Hartnell Years extended ensemble, and Martin Miller is not even trying to hide his native Czech accent. Now, the British actor playing Chenchu, Jimmy Gardner, who went on to a 6-decade career, is a travesty. Paul Carson, playing Ling Tao towards the end of the story, is pretty effective. You can't blame Hussein for hewing to the casting practices of the time, but for me it makes parts of the story really difficult to sit through, as soaring as some of the rest of the dialogue sequences may be. In context, is the casting a fatal flaw? Marco Polo has superior dialogue. For all its meandering lack of twists, the plotting is actually pretty tight. Ping Cho puts on a performance of the Tale of the Hashashins in episode 3, a story later retold by Dumas in The Count of Monte Cristo. Ian points out that the word assassin derives from the Hashashins, and episode 7 is called Assassin at Peking, meaning the assassin clue was hiding in plain sight the whole story. And of course, the Khan's summer palace at Shangtu is the very stately pleasure dome described by Coleridge in the famously unfinished poem Xanadu. Like a Broadway drama, Marco Polo is a simple tale propelled by its sets, scene changes, and dialogue. You're in the audience, watching top actors, well, most of them, trade clever insults and deep philosophical insights while largely sitting still on small sets. Yeah, there's a sword fight at the end, which is lost to us, along with the rest of the video, but this serial is driven primarily by words. I think most of the words are good words. Doctor Who would return to the historical genre many more times over its first 4 seasons, but none of the other serials would ever look or sound, or unfold, the way Marco Polo does. That's both a blessing and a curse, and a blessing.
Handmaidens, dulcet voice, soft of face, attended them, and thus bemused did they dwell in this man-made paradise, until Aladdin, intent upon some evil deed, proffered again the hushish draught, and brought them sleeping to his castle. What, Lord, are we cast out of paradise? Awakening they cried. Not so. Go abroad, seek out my enemies, and strike them down. But care not for your lives. Paradise is eternal. So terror stalked the land for many years. Then one day came mighty Hulagu to stand before Aladdin's lair for 3 long years in siege. Thus fell Aladdin and his men. Now honest hands reap harvests of life from the soil where death and evil reigned, and those who journey through the veil are heard to say, "'Tis truly paradise today."
Delightful picture.
My lord is kind.
Thank you, picture.
Charming picture. Charming. Susan, do you know that we use the word hashashin in English today?
No?
Yes, assassins.
Assassin?
Yes.
The Marco Polo novelization was released in April 1985 in paperback on a Thursday. I was coming to the end of 6th grade, 10 weeks left of elementary school, and then off to junior high school that fall. 1985 was a tumultuous year for me. I hadn't discovered girls yet, so I was not yet living in a constant haze of heartache and distraction. That will come in 1987, and trust I will have a full essay on that subject when the time comes. The transition from elementary school to junior high was rough. I began the calendar year with one set of best friends and basically finished the year with another. Junior high school does that to you. Though the original friends are all friends again, so life has a funny way of putting you back where you need to be. The previous autumn, September 1984, at the height of my initial phase of baseball and New York Mets fandom, I had entered a contest in the local newspaper, Long Island Newsday, a right-wing tabloid, which did, to be fair, have a great kids section and a pretty good sports section. I had previously submitted a joke to the kids section in January 1981, shortly after the presidential inaugural. "What is the president's favorite weapon?" I riddled. "A ray gun." Hardy har har. After the assassination attempt 2 months later, I regretted the joke, and I don't think the paper ever published it anyway. In late 1984, the sports section ran a contest. If you could correctly guess which Mets would finish the year with which statistics, you'd win prizes. For example, guess how many home runs Darryl Strawberry would hit. Guess how many saves Jesse Orosco would have. Those are the 2 I remember. There were definitely others. Darryl Strawberry and Jesse Orosco are big baseball names, trust me. Strawberry was a borderline Hall of Fame candidate before his career was derailed by alcoholism, cancer, and other personal foibles. Orosco played in parts of 4 different decades and still holds the record for more games pitched than anyone else in baseball history. There will not be a quiz at the end of this episode, I promise, but those are big names for baseball fans even today. I had guessed that Orosco would finish the year with 31 saves and that Strawberry would finish the year with 25 home runs. Orosco saved his 31st about a week before the end of the season. Strawberry entered the final game with 24 home runs, and I was thrilled when he slugged number 25 early in the last game of the year. Unfortunately for me, he hit number 26 later in the game, which spoiled my contest entry and made me a loser, more so. But the Mets lost that final game, so Orosco did not pitch, and I was a winner on that count. Jesse Orozco, 31 saves, 1984. You could look it up. The prize was 2 tickets to the first night game played at Shea Stadium in the 1985 season, a Friday, April 12th contest versus the Cincinnati Reds. Portions of that game were briefly posted on YouTube, though sadly got deleted, probably for copyright claim, before I had a chance to download them. The Mets won that game, April 12, 1985, with future Hall of Famer Gary Carter hitting a home run for the only scoring in the game. The winning pitcher was Bruce Bereni. That's a name you don't need to know. He pitched only a handful of games the rest of his career, which ended in 1986 due to injury. But this baseball game coincides with the release of Marco Polo the book. On that night at Shea Stadium, I'd been a Doctor Who fan for about 5 months, and had been collecting the novelizations for almost 3. I heard about the Marco Polo novelization before I ever saw it on the shelf. A kindly cashier at Walden Books had signed me up for their sci-fi book club called Other Worlds. As a member of Other Worlds, you got a tiny cardboard membership card with a drawing of a buff male space hero standing on an asteroid and firing red laser bolts at an unseen enemy. Our buff male space hero has a dragon at his back, and both are romantically backlit by an enormous yellow moon. Club members also got a 10% discount on books, which is probably why my father wanted me to sign up. And there was a monthly newsletter called Signals, but spelled with an X, Egg Signals. Trust me, I am reading these details on an old blog entry. I'd forgotten most of them myself. This is not going to be on the quiz either. Walden Books later got bought out by Borders, and Borders went bankrupt and closed forever in 2011. I no longer have the membership card, I no longer have any of the newsletters, but I do recall that the monthly newsletter had reviews of the Doctor Who books as they came out, including The Highlanders, episode 91 of this podcast, and Marco Polo, this episode. The reviewer described the Marco novelization for Signals as, quote, a taut 144 pages. That detail I didn't need to look up. What was going on in my mind was a contest between baseball fandom, which I developed feverishly in 1982, and Doctor Who fandom. A month after the Marco Polo release, and a month after that night at Shea Stadium, my 6th grade class went on a week-long school trip to a nature preserve in upstate New York. We left by bus from the school parking lot on Monday morning and returned Friday afternoon. While I was away, I asked my parents to tape Doctor Who every night on VHS at 7 p.m., and I also asked them to save every issue of Newsday that week so I could read the Mets scores. There was no other way at age 11 on a class trip pre-internet to get those scores in the woods. When I got home on that Friday, I watched the Doctor Who's, but I ignored the newspapers. Somehow my brain deprogrammed me as a Mets fan during that trip, and by the end of the Mets season, which ended dramatically in October 1985, I was not paying attention. I did not watch a single pitch of the playoffs, which of course the Mets were not in. I didn't start watching baseball again until the summer of 1987, right around the time that I discovered girls. If you know your Mets history, by the way, you're laughing very, very hard right now at my missing the 1986 season. For the 98% of my viewers who don't know Mets history, well, stay tuned for my October 1986 episode, which I believe was on Celestial Toymaker, and thereby hangs a tale. I think I got the Marco Polo book in the autumn of 1985. I read it, reread it again, quickly realizing that at age almost 12, even if I no longer cared about baseball, I really, really liked historicals. Even if Marco Polo, come to find out, might not be very historically accurate or culturally sensitive. The book also landed for me, as I alluded to earlier, at a difficult time. That first semester of junior high school was rough academically. I'd gone from being a very big and very smart fish in the small pond of my one elementary school to being a literally minuscule fish in the very large pond of a junior high that drew from 4 different elementary schools. Minuscule as in I didn't hit my growth spurt until the end of '86, so I was still the shortest kid in the class, and I looked about 3 years younger than I really was. True story, there was a 9th grader in junior high with fantastically big hairsprayed 1980s hair, Pam Coconellis. She would chase after me in the hallways going, and I will not attempt to do the voice or the Long Island accent. Oh, he's so cute! Now, I was friendly with Pam's younger brother, who was in my grade. I believe he is now a restaurateur in South Florida. He would always tease me about his sister. But I was also having trouble adjusting to the classwork, never mind the interpersonal foibles of junior high. And of course, my parents' marriage was noisily dissolving in the background. I would not survive the 1985-86 school year. That Marco Polo book was escapism. Like, literally, the only positive aspect of my life in the autumn of '85 was the Marco Polo novelization. When I read the book, it was the closest that I've ever come to vanishing, literally vanishing, into the pages of a book. I imagined myself journeying to Cathay along with the TARDIS crew, frantically trying to warn them of Tigana's treachery. I recall being very upset, viscerally upset, when Ping Cho's elderly betrothed died off-screen. I'm not sure why that bugged me so much, but as my parents were nagging me about schoolwork and about my lack of dating girls, I desperately wanted to be reading Marco Polo and not doing anything else.
Oh, here you are, my child. Come, we have something to tell you. A tragedy has occurred at the table tonight.
Tragedy, my lord?
Your beloved husband, to be so anxious to be worthy of your love, drank a potion of quicksilver and sulfur, the elixir of life and eternal youth, and expired on the spot. Come into my arms, child. Let me share your grief. You're overdoing it, my dear. The child is dry-eyed. Oh, ungrateful wretch. Do you not weep for your lost love?
My lady, I grieve an old man's death as all would do. But how can I weep for a love I have never known?
Tell us, Pincho, do you wish to return to your home in Samarkand, or would you like to stay a while in our court and brighten all our days?
If I may, my lord, I would like to stay.
So be it. Wait, Marco. Tell us, my child, your opinion of the travelers from a distant land.
They are my friends, my lord, as they will always be.
Thank you, Pincho. Wait, Marco. Let that young officer escort Lady Pincho to her quarters.
Happily, my grades eventually turned around, and I did not disappear into the pages of Marco Polo. I did ask my mom to read it, and she did. Science fiction she had no interest in, but historicals she did like. She was a dedicated BBC viewer via PBS's Masterpiece Theater and Mystery brands. Marco Polo was the only Doctor Who novelization she ever read, but she did say she enjoyed it. So with my autobiographical chapter out of the way, this week, let's look at the book. It's remarkable, although most of us would not have known this at the time. I did not get to hear the surviving audios until I discovered them on Napster in 1999, for dramatically changing the ending of the story. If all you know about Marco Polo is the novelization, well, you really don't know Marco Polo. Consider this: in Doctor Who's first 3 televised serials, including the one that a particular writer's heir does not want you to see, the Doctor was an antagonist for Ian and Barbara to overcome. As much an antagonist as Cal, or the Daleks, or the TARDIS's telepathic circuits. If not for the presence of Susan, who bridged her grandfather with the school teachers, he might have been an outright villain, rather than merely an antagonist. All that is dispensed with from Marco Polo, and from here on out there's very little doubting that the travelers are all on the same team. That being said, William Hartnell has a fairly minimal role in Marco Polo the TV episodes, absent almost entirely from episode 2, with Ian handling the lion's share of the on-screen heroics, such as resolving the episodes 4 and 6 cliffhangers all by himself. You wouldn't know this from the book. Hartnell on TV in early 1964 was no longer an antagonist, but at the same time was not quite yet a hero either. That would come later, starting in episode 5 of The Keys of Marinus, as Philip Hinchcliffe and Jim Sangster and I discussed back in episode 59 of this podcast. But in Marco Polo, not yet. Not yet. In a nutshell, episodes 5 through 7 of TV's Marco Polo are jettisoned and rewritten for the novelization. The episodes 5 and 6 cliffhangers are radically different, as is the episode 7 climax. We'll talk a little more about this as we go, but rather than make this a bullet point list about the differences, the changes, I want to talk about them more in conceptual terms. What the Marco Polo novelization does in restructuring the TV is to restore the Doctor to center stage in 1985 in a way that Lucarati presumably was not encouraged or allowed to do when writing the scripts 21 years earlier. The TV is brimming with philosophical debates and verbal sword fights, but told its story through words, sets, costumes, because it was hard on the budget and the available studio space to stage elaborate pitched action sequences. However, a TV script is supposed to run about 1 page for each minute of televised action, so Marco Polo, were it to exist in movie format, or if it were to exist at all, would be about 175 minutes long, and the novelization is only 136 pages of text. So Lucarati had a couple of tasks in adapting the scripts. First, he had to restructure the TV episodes for a 1980s audience, expecting heroism out of their Doctor. And second, he had to remove a lot of dialogue. An awful lot of dialogue. At times, the slicing and dicing of the TV scripts is painful. Much of Tigana's careful baiting of Marco into distrusting the TARDIS crew is pared away, as is Marco's poetic imagery when debating with Ian whether or not the TARDIS can truly travel in time. Of course, on the other hand, TV serials in the mid-1960s had to duplicate a lot within the story. There were no previously on Doctor Who, Marco Polo segments, and there were few in-episode flashbacks apart from cliffhanger reprises. A chunk of each week had to recap via dialogue what happened last week. That's why when you watch these Hartnell and Troughton and Pertwee episodes all in one go, which I do not recommend, there seems to be so much padding. So Marco Polo the book roughly adheres to the structure of the TV story, at least through the episode 4 cliffhanger, but there are much fewer words on the page than on TV, and in the case of Marco's Captain Log updates, these are either turned into prose or jettisoned entirely. But restructuring the story to fit the book, and to render the Doctor more heroic, mostly works. The episode 5 cliffhanger is frustrating on TV because it's a Gilligan's Island moment. Susan stupidly foiling an escape attempt in the TARDIS. The cliffhanger is resolved early in episode 6 by Marco arguing with Tigana about the TARDIS crew's true intentions, and that's the sort of long debate for which the book does not have space. So the cliffhanger is restructured, and pretty effectively. Let's read the top of page 100. The Doctor clambered up onto the wagon. Ping Cho ran over to him and kissed the back of his hand. "Goodbye, kind lord," she whispered. "Farewell, gentle maiden," the Doctor replied, "and refuse to marry someone old enough to be my grandfather, Ping Cho went to Barbara and Ian and turned to say goodbye, leaving Susan until the last. They embraced with tears in their eyes as the Doctor put the key into the lock. "For a moment I thought you were going with them, Ping Cho." Marco's voice came out of the darkness. "No, Doctor. If you look into the gloom, you will see that you are completely surrounded by my bearers, all of whom are as armed as I am. And as Susan is not yet up there with you, it would be pointless trying to dash for freedom. So come down, please, and give me the key." The Doctor withdrew the key from the lock, and Barbara and Ian helped him to the ground. He handed Marco the key, without a word. "Yes, Doctor, you're right. It is a useful thing," Marco said enigmatically, as the Doctor walked back into the way station. I would like to have seen the scripted episode 6 cliffhanger in print, the one that at long last confirms Tigana's villainy to Ian, a fact which we the audience knew since the end of episode 1, but only suspected by the TARDIS crew. But the TV cliffhanger is problematic, in that Ian should not have brought Ping Cho, a 15-year-old girl, along on a rescue mission. The arrival of Ling Tao early in episode 7 to break up Ian and Tigana's fight, it is a bit of a deus ex machina. Lucarati in the book instead puts Ling Tao into the episode 6 material, Paul Carson having been absent from that TV, and he has Ling Tao send Tigana directly on to Peking, which on TV happened as a partial episode 7 resolution to the episode 6 cliffhanger. and it's Ling Tao in the book who helps Ian liberate the TARDIS, and not from Tigana, but from Kuiju. This sets up Ling Tao as a strong romantic lead for Ping Cho. Susan's sweet exhortation to Ling Tao at the end of the book to cherish her is an improvement over the TV, where any relationship between the two is merely implied, if that. That makes Marco Polo the book an unapologetic love story, which it wasn't on TV, and it makes Ling Tao a major character in the book rather than a minor one. Also in the book, Kuiju gets to survive the episode 6 cliffhanger, a happy ending denied to Turi Lemkau in all 3 of his Hartnell-era performances, so those are improvements too. As for the Doctor, in the book, late in the episode 5 material, he gets an ambiguous but charming discussion with Marco over wine, which is not present at all on TV, and it's alluded to in the passage I read above. The Doctor is restored to the episode 2 material, by the way. In the episode 7 material, the Doctor takes a more active part in the final thwarting of Tigana, and the return of the TARDIS to him is a royal gift. On TV, Tigana kills himself, and the Doctor has to be shooed out of the Khan's palace and into the TARDIS to escape on a second's notice. The Doctor of the Marco Polo novelization is given lines and actions that were not present on TV, and you'd have loved to have heard Hartnell read these lines for the audiobook, had he not died a decade before the book was written. I think it was Rob Shearman in the first Running Through Carter's volume, which described the book as dull. I don't think it is, though at 136 pages of text it is longer than the Target books we were used to in the early 80s, the very early 80s. The book does spend a lot of time describing outfits and rooms and meals. It is not quite a Lonely Planet, Outer Mongolia, but it definitely does not resemble too many other novelizations written out of the previous 93 Target books before this one. For Gianluca Rotti, this is not the last time that he is going to change the ending. He has one more novelization to come, and that's coming up probably at least 6 months from now on this podcast, book 121, The Massacre. There, the last 9 chapters of the book have virtually nothing to do with the television. Ross and I alluded to this earlier. Marco Polo at least holds out until the last 44 pages to go off and tell an entirely new story, but The Massacre, the book, very, very little in common with the TV serial, and I look forward to discussing that with you when the time comes. Next time, on Doctor Who Literature, we jump back to the present. We jump back to Season 21, as Season 22 had just concluded on the BBC, but is not yet with us in terms of novelizations. We are talking, once again, with Andrew Smith, the author of Full Circle, and a previous guest on the show a few weeks ago. I strongly encourage you to listen to that episode if you have not yet. This time, Andrew is going to be discussing a book with us, and not his own book. We are going back to 1643. We are going to discuss the Battle of Little Hodgkin. We are going to discuss the Queen of the May. We are going to discuss the Malice. We are going to discuss, I assume, the big difference between Dennis Little's accent in Image of the Fendal and his lack of one in Doctor Who. Book 95, The Awakening. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Doctor Who Literature. This podcast is produced by David Barsky, Jim Sangster, and yours truly. This week's episode was written and edited by me. Our logo is by Jim Sangster. Special thanks to my special guest, Ross Aitken of Gallifrey's Most Wanted. This podcast can be found on most of your podcast apps of choice. You can find all past episodes at podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/Doctor Who Lit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Twitter and Mastodon and Blue Sky at Doctor Who Novels, that's Dr. Who Novels, and on email at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. Please drop me a line with your comments, questions, and suggestions. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.